Hey everybody, what's going on? Hope you're having a great Friday or whenever you're watching the replay. Ben and I are excited to jump back in with you for another Friday. Ben, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's a beautiful Friday in Fargo, North Dakota, and I'm getting stuff done already. So
Yeah,
it
that's
feels like a
good.
productive morning.
That's good. But yeah, Ben just got off a pretty sweet trip. I was pretty jealous from Costa Rica last week, so
hmm
been pretty awesome pictures to see.
It was a lot of fun, but both my wife and I said we're going to wait a couple years before trying another trip with both of our kids because traveling with two kids under the age of 5
Yeah,
makes for a lot of extra work and a lot of
for
extra
sure.
baggage that you got to carry with,
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
both emotionally and physically.
Yeah, a lot of baggage. That's good. Well, hey, we wanted to, Ben and I wanted to jump into a topic today that's really close to us because it's actually a part of what we do within Elementum. And it's really talking about the idea of leadership teams. We would consider that one of the core foundational pieces to starting, developing, strengthening your ministry. So let's maybe start this way, Ben. Let's maybe talk about how we would define leadership, because I think sometimes it's a little bit different than other people, because sometimes we'll talk to a church and say, hey, do you have a leadership team? Oh yeah, we got a leadership team. Then as we begin to ask questions, it's not quite in line with our definition of leadership. So why don't you just kind of jump into how do we define leadership
Yeah.
that might be a little bit different from other people?
Yeah, I think probably the single biggest difference for our purposes is when we say, do you have a leadership team, or you call it a core team, or whatever, different ministers want to name it different things. But the key difference is that a lot of the people that we talk with, what they have functionally is a team of people who are leaders in title, but all they do is they execute tasks. So maybe you have your worship leader, or you have your sound team or media team leader, and really what they're doing is they're just executing on the task of making sure the checklist is completed for the event or for whatever. Where when we're talking a leadership team, what we're meaning is who are the people who own the vision of the ministry, understand it, they get the heart, they own the values, and they if you were so easy way to say it is if you were to disappear, your leadership team are the people who would continue keep the ministry going. And I think this is part of the reason why for me this is so like close to my heart, or I think it's so essential for particularly college and young adult age ministries, is because of the transitory nature
Yeah.
of that age range. So what happens, so many ministries that I've seen, they'll start and they last 1, 2, 3, maybe 6 years, which is, there's a season for ministries. Not that all ministries are supposed to go forever, but a lot of ministries simply end because it was one person leading it, maybe two people leading it. They were young adults, they transitioned, they got married, they moved because of a job, and that ministry disappears because they haven't been intentional about training up other people
Yeah.
to take on that leadership role.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in a lot of ways, what we see, and this is, when you look statistically, even on a broader spectrum at the church, there's a reason why most of the churches are under 100 people in the United States. And because it's primarily driven by one single person. Now, that person may have a worship leader and whatever, but they're really the only one that's owning and carrying the weight of the ministry. And so even as
Yeah.
I think about different, ministry leaders that we've jumped in with, where you could see that they're going to hit like a ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
or they have hit a ceiling because in essence, nobody else is shouldering the weight of the ministry with them. They're not helping them think about, they might be having leaders that are thinking about the now of ministry, but maybe not, hey, where are we going to be a year from now? We're going to be 2 years from now. How do we develop and grow, and what do we need to implement in order to get there? And so we really want to see other primary leaders have people that are shouldering the weight of the ministry as well.
I think, but before we talk about some of the steps to like developing that kind of core team of leaders, I think what do you think would be what are some of the barriers or things that prevent people from having that kind of team? Because I think most people would say they hear us talking about this and they would say, "Yeah, I want to have a team of people, but dot dot dot."
Yeah. Well, a couple things come to mind immediately. Is one is I think that, and I was talking to on a coaching call with somebody this last week where they had initially invited some leaders to kind of participate in the ministry and didn't really know what to do with them. And so then he was like, well, do I really want to do it again? Because are they going to want to jump in? And, do I actually know what to do with them? So I would say that that's one thing. I think the other thing too is there is like a lack, just kind of a understanding what to do with them,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
what does it mean to develop and move. I'm curious, what would you say on that?
Yeah, I think another big one is it's more difficult to have a team of leaders than it is to lead by yourself. That may sound counterintuitive, but and maybe this is some of my personality speaking, where I'm the eldest. I'm a pretty solid, like I'll do it myself if you're not going to do it right. Which I think is a lot of people who get into a leadership role in a church, they have a personality of saying I'm willing to do the work.
Yeah.
Um, but it's harder, it takes more time, and
Hmm.
it's emotionally more risky emotionally to entrust other people with something that you have
Yeah.
put so much energy and time and heart into. And I think that's a huge barrier for people, a lot of times not consciously. But you get people who kind of, they step into it, they try to bring people in, and some of those leaders disappoint them and don't do it the way that they thought it should be done. So they say, well, we're gonna back off that, and we'll just stick with task leadership because I can
Hmm.
let them do the tasks. I can define what the task is. They'll execute on the task, and if they fall short in this task, I can come in and I can do the
Yeah.
task on their behalf.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have senior leaders who are really owning the vision, owning the heart of the ministry, that's something in some ways that you can't step into and take over
Yeah.
from them, which is
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah, I think too. I think one of the misconceptions or barriers that I see a lot of times out there as well is that you can't ask volunteers to take that type of role, right?
Yeah,
It's got to
yeah,
be an intern or an associate or a resident or whatever. And I think sometimes that even that we've kind of helped leaders break through is saying, no, like there's a sense where you can have volunteers that have that level of ownership within the ministry. But I think sometimes there's this, well, I'm the only one on staff, we can't hire another staff person, therefore I have to be the only one to do that.
yeah, yeah. I was actually in a coaching call with one of our community members yesterday, and they were talking about kind of this exact thing, where they're looking to recruit some new leaders. So they want to launch some new community groups, what they call them. They have 5 right now. They want to see double that number, give or take, in about the next year. So they're asking some questions around, what does it look like? How do we recruit people? We got people who are saying we want to do it, but we don't have time. And I think really one of the young adult and college age range is one of the best places to invite significant
Yeah.
investment, time wise, particularly from young adults and college students. Because they have more time. Like, man, I thought I was busy when I was in college. I thought I was busy when my wife and I got
Wait till you
married.
have kids.
Yeah, and I was leading 2 ministries and working a full time job. I am much more busy now working one job, leading ministry, and having 2 kids. Um, so what we were talking about with this leader was basically saying, it's actually, in some ways, it's actually better to ask more of those people, because then you're going to get the people who actually want to invest deeply. And man, our local ministry here is really, I technically, we still don't have any full-time staff. All of our leaders are volunteers, and
Yeah.
it's been amazing. This last year, obviously with COVID, it's been a little bit weird, but over the years, we've had people who are investing 10, 15, 20 hours a week outside of their jobs because they so value the work that we're doing. Um, so yeah, don't tell me that volunteers can't have huge,
Yeah.
massive
Yeah.
roles in your
Well,
ministry.
and I was talking to this somebody the other day, I don't remember who it was, but also is that in a lot of ways you're setting the pace and the understanding of what it will look like for them in the future to engage with the church. So if
Yep.
they're able
Yep.
to have high commitment, high participation, high ownership in the ministry as a 20 something, and can navigate all the things around them as busy as they are or think they are, whatever, in a lot of ways you're discipling them into how they need to continue to do that. As like for you, Ben, because I
Mm-hmm.
knew you single, no kids. In a lot of ways, the things that you put into patterns as a 20-year-old
Yeah,
is in a lot of ways the ways that you're living right now. You just learned to manage it then. So as you
for sure.
continue to grow and life kind of changed, it continued to be a priority and something that was important for you within your ministry and life.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that leads naturally to the question of what are some of the essentials, what are the foundational steps for if you want to have a core team of people who are actually helping
Yeah.
lead the ministry, not just doing tasks, but taking ownership of the thing as a whole, or maybe a specific segment of it. What are some of the essential steps?
Yeah. So before I go into step one, this is actually stuff that we use. So
Mhm.
this is actually pulled content from our coaching of what we do. So this is really good stuff. So I'd encourage you guys to jot some of this stuff down, think about how to implement it. Okay. So step number one, we'll talk about this, is defining the qualities and the characteristics of what you're looking for in leaders. So what do we mean by that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, what the starting point really is the qualities, characteristics, like Andy said. This is about your heart level, your character, your passion, more so than skills. We oftentimes, I think, we want to start with skills, but really, I would greatly encourage, if you're wanting to create a core team, start with character, start with heart, because the skills, a lot of times, skills can be taught. But
Hmm.
character, maturity level, some of those things, those take much longer to raise people up in. So much better to have someone who has high quality character and low skills, because they can be leveled up in the skills pretty easily.
Yeah, and I would say in that kind of piggybacking is both of those things are important. You know,
Mhm.
even what I'll talk to leaders about is because a lot of leaders don't define both the internal qualities and characteristics as well as the external qualities and characteristics they're looking for. And like you're saying is I think some of the external things can be developed and taught where some of the heart and some of the humility or passion, some of those things that are a little bit harder to cultivate and develop within people. But I think a lot of times the challenge is that we kind of like, if you got a pulse, you can be a leader. You know, like sometimes we so desperately need
Yeah.
leaders, like
Yep.
whoever's willing to raise their hand, you can be on the leadership team. So
Yeah. I think so. Here's a question. What do you think? What are some of the character qualities that should be essentials for leaders that people often overlook?
yeah, I mean, what I would say is, well, one is you don't think it should be overlooked, but a passionate love for the Lord is one that sometimes we assume, but don't always, like verbalize. But I also think about like humility. And that's one of the
Yeah.
things even that we talk about within like even the training session is this idea of humility. That's such a key piece in terms of like the posture of somebody's heart and their ability to desire. And I would say maybe another thing is just teachability and the desire to learn. Because when you really get somebody who is saying, okay, I admit I don't know everything, I got areas of weakness, but I want to learn, I want to grow, I want somebody to speak into my life, man, when you have a leader like that, that's a huge game changer.
Yeah, there's two fairly well-known acronyms: FAT, faithful, available,
Mhm.
teachable. It's a great grid. We use one borrowed from Patrick Lencioni as humble, hungry, smart. Um, Having some grids or like things like that when you're thinking about who are the people that I'm looking for in a leadership team are hugely helpful.
Yeah, that's good.
The next step though is it's not enough to you have that stuff in your brain. That's important. Don't just pick whoever off the street to come onto your leadership team. That's going to cause a lot of trouble. But the next step that I think a lot of people overlook is communicating clearly what your expectations are
Yeah.
of those people when you're bringing them on board. A lot of the times we'll say, hey, you want to be a leader, and with very minimal boundaries or definitions of what that looks like, then you get frustrated with the people when they're not living up to your expectations. And probably half the reason they're not living up to your expectations is because you're the only one with your expectations.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's huge is those unmet expectations are a reason why either people won't invite other people into leadership and do that, or it's just a constant kind of struggle of like not really knowing what to do with them. And here's the encouragement. In fact, we do this and have our leaders do that, is actually write it out, like
Mhm.
develop a document so you can sit down over coffee or a meal and say, hey, here's the expectations. And I think that does two things. Is one is it creates a lot clearer communication in terms of expectations, but it also allows you to point back to something if expectations aren't being met. Hey, I just want to
Yeah.
remind you, like what we talked about a year ago as you were coming on as a leadership. Here's the three things that we're looking for. Man, I'm not seeing this in your life. So what it does is it kind of takes it out of like being subjective, and really
Yeah.
kind of hones in on saying, no, we communicated this.
Yeah, and it becomes this great discipleship opportunity for that person. If maybe say you're one of the expectations is you're going to be at 80% of or 90% of our core team meetings and someone's showing up to 50%. What you don't want to do with that is right off the bat say you didn't meet the expectations, you're out. What that should be instead is a trigger for you to say, hey, this is a conversation that we can have with this person and say, what's going on? Maybe there's a legitimate thing in their life that they're dealing with, that they need care and love and support to work through, or maybe it's something that's just a matter of lack of maturity, and this is an
Yeah.
opportunity for you as a senior leader to say, hey, I'm going to help you learn some of these basic life skills like time management or being on time to something or following through on your commitments, because that's a part of discipleship as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I
That's
think
good.
one more thing I'd say, out of all the things you could list on that job description, is what we call it. You don't have to call it that, but I think it's absolutely essential. If you should be able to in one sentence say, here's what the win is for
Yeah.
you as a leader, your whatever their role is, it might have a variety of roles. What's the one sentence statement of if you do blank? Or if blank happens as a result of you being on this team, this is what the win is. This is the goal that we're aiming towards. And give your people that kind of specificity and clarity around what their purpose is,
Yeah.
then let them figure out a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah, that's good. Cool. So step one, define the qualities and characteristics. Step two, communicate those expectations. Step three is one that I would say that we see a lot of kind of either missing or
Mhm.
it's not fully developed. And that is to build out a plan to develop that leadership team. Looking at where your leadership team is at, where you want them to be, what are the strengths and the weaknesses of that leadership team, and then how are you going to move them forward. So what are your thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Ben?
yeah. Couple thoughts. One, I mean, on the most basic level, you don't have a leadership team if you're not meeting regularly. If you're meeting once a month, that's maybe just, in my opinion, just skating into that spot. I would say like every other week or so is a great rhythm for a
Yeah.
team. Obviously, you get to decide when the rhythm of your ministry, what that looks like, but you got to be meeting regularly, otherwise you can't function as a team. Second thought on that is, I think, uh, developing your team. One of the things I don't want you to do as a leader is I don't want you to have this be just a deeper Bible study. The goal, if you have a leadership team, these should be people who are mature enough that they're feeding themselves spiritually, that they should be involved in other spaces like going to church regularly, in Bible studies, reading the Bible on their own. Use that time to develop them at the next level as leaders, develop skills, develop intuition, strengths, and stuff that are not being developed in other spaces. If your leadership team is just a theology training, that's maybe beneficial to do occasionally, but that shouldn't be the main meat of
Yeah.
that team development time.
Yeah. And I think about the times even that I struggled with this, of what it does is when you don't have a plan, you're always reactionary
Yeah,
in terms of like, okay, I got a leadership team meeting. What should I do tonight? Versus like, okay, here's where we want to be in 6 months as a team. What spaces do we need to be a part of? What books do we need to read? What podcasts do
yeah,
they need to listen to? And so you're thinking more proactive versus reactive
yeah,
with
that's
the
huge.
leadership team.
Yeah, and I really encourage people to say be 6 months out on
Mhm.
what you're doing with your leadership team, even if that 6 months out is you sitting down for 20 minutes and in a Word document, just saying, here let's say we meet every other week. Here is, in 6 months will be 12 meetings. Here's 12 things that I think would be good for us to
Yeah.
delve into. And just so that you have that as a vague general roadmap, and then you can come back around and fill that out. I think that's going to be hugely helpful
Yeah.
for you rather than
Yeah.
just,
And even that, and that's one of the things that we have our leaders do is to develop that 6 to 9 month plan. And in that, it doesn't mean that there are not going to be things in the ministry that require special attention or focus where you maybe don't do that leadership meeting, but at least you kind of have a long game objective of what you're trying to do to help the ministry move forward and that leadership move forward.
yeah. So what would you say if someone's sitting down to do that planning? What are some things that should be on that plan in the 6 month span? What are a couple of things that they should absolutely be touching on with their leaders?
Well, here's what I would say is I think it's easy to default to maintenance in those leadership team meetings. Like, oh, hey, how did last Wednesday night go? Like how did Sunday school class go? How did the last event go? Those are the easy things, which I think are important within leadership team meetings. But I would be encouraging you guys to read one of the gospels together, or to read a book together, or
Yeah.
and here's even one of the things that will help our leaders do, of saying, in the season, what are the same 3 questions that you need to ask every time that you meet, because it's going to kind of help steer what you're trying to cultivate and develop. And so, like, for us, one of the major components as they're developing that core team is discipleship, right? That we want those leaders actively discipling. And so I think about even helping some of the leaders we're working with ask the questions, okay, what questions are you going to ask every time that you're together in your leadership team that is going to be like a accountability and a kind of keeping discipleship to the forefront of what you're doing?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the helpful frameworks that I've used for years is borrowing from the Ministry 3DM. They have what are called their life shapes. I'm sure we've
Yeah.
mentioned them here before, but they have one called the triangle, which is talking about a balanced relational life. So the 3 points of the triangle are up, in, and out. So up is relationship with God, in is relationship with the body of Christ, out is relationship connection with God's mission in the world. So I love using those 3 things and saying, hey, in a 2 month span, with our leadership team, we should be touching on each one of those points at least once. So in one meeting, maybe we're saying we're going to focus up your relationship with God. We're going to, read some scripture. We're going to spend an extended chunk of time in prayer. We're going to say, how are you doing relationally with your brothers and sisters in Christ? How's your community gathering stuff going? Out is thinking missionally, maybe you go out for a meeting and actually do something out in your community or something like that. So framework like that. The one other thing I would mention, I think it's absolutely essential for you to help your people in those development meetings discover what's am I good at? What are my strengths? What are my spiritual gifts? Where am I weak? And then help them develop some of the skills of finding their place in the team and working together as a
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. That and that's one of the fun things that we've seen too, is like even the awareness that people are not like you, and to recognize where everybody fits. And you can use, I don't know,
Yeah,
Myers-Briggs, DISC, Enneagram, Strengths Finders, whatever you want to
yeah,
use, but those are
yeah.
great kind of conversation points to realize the different strengths and weaknesses of the people on the team. That's good. That's
And
good.
one last point on this, I think,
Yep.
don't expect your leadership team to be great right off the bat. We've had in the 10 years, 11 years now that I've been doing ministry here, we've had ups and downs. We've had seasons where, man, it feels like our team here is like running on all cylinders, doing awesome. There's been other seasons where it's been rocky and rough and frustrating. And that's just a part of leadership, right?
Yeah.
So stick with it. Is well worth the work. And even if it takes you a couple of years to get to the point where you're actually able to hand off the heart of the ministry to some other people, is worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I would say too, is have both the long game of what you want your leadership team to be, but understand the progression of getting there. Your
Yeah.
first iteration may not be that, the second one may not, but taking steps towards, man, if we could be this as a leadership team, I think that would be powerful within our ministry as well. Cool. So 3 steps we want to cover: define the qualities, characteristics, skills. Step number 1. Step number 2, communicate those expectations. And then step number 3, build a plan to help develop that team. So I think we're good on time today, Ben. Thanks for taking a few minutes. Hey, if you are listening to this and you want to talk a little bit more about your leadership team, would encourage you to jump on a call with one of our team members. You can go to elementumresources.com/call, and that will get you to our calendar where you can jump on. And we just love to talk a little bit more about your leadership team, what the strengths and weaknesses are, and how maybe some suggestions for beginning to move forward.
Good stuff.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I hope everybody has a good Friday or whatever you're listening to this. We will catch you on the next Friday conversation.
See ya.